Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today, our special guest is Amy Coor. She is Chief Brokerage Officer for Et Properties Christie's International Real Estate. She oversees company-wide strategy, growth, and agent services for one of the nation's largest brokerages. Over the past 2 decades, Amy has been instrumental in expanding brokerage operations, developing coaching and training programs, and supporting agents at every stage of their careers. She's known for her ability to help real estate professionals reach their full potential, giving them the tools and confidence to lead like CEOs of their own business. Amy, welcome onto the show today. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, Allison, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and as we were just
Make me sound so good. Reading that, you make me sound so good, like I've accomplished so much. Holy
You
cow.
have! That's why we're having you on today, right? And it was funny because right before we started recording, we were chatting and he was like, I live and breathe and just real estate is my life. And I'm like, and that's why you were on the show today. That's why you're here with us. You are going to spill your experience, your knowledge, how you've helped all these agents reach their full potential. And you're going to share it with Ohio today. So we're excited.
Hello, Ohio. I'm excited to be here.
But before we dive into today's conversation, which is all going to be about how to take back control, how to focus on what we can control in the midst of chaos, and you have just some fantastic tips you're going to share with us. But before we get started into that, I would like to hear a little bit about you. Could you share with us how you got started in real estate and a little about what you do today?
Yeah, you bet. Wow. I mean, it's wild. It's, 23, 24 years I've been in the business, believe it or not. And I got into real estate back in the early 2000s. I was working in technology, had a really good job, but was kind of at this point of like, when I grow up, what do I want to do with my life? And, I'd always kind of liked real estate. I loved looking at it. I loved design. And so my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, had said to me, you kind of like real estate, maybe you should consider getting your license. And if people tend to know me, once I've kind of got something in my head and I decide I want to do it, next thing you know, it's sort of done or on its way. And so I decided to, figure out how to take classes. I took classes at Hanson Realty, this tiny little place on Halsted in downtown Chicago, was still working full time, got my license, and then dabbled a little bit while I still had a full-time job. And then probably 3 to 4 months into it, I just ripped off the Band-Aid and said, you know what? Like, now's the time. I don't really have responsibility. I wasn't married. It was just me that I had to figure it out. And, it was really when I started going full blown was like 2003 and the market was moving. And so, it was like, how hard could this be? This is great. The market was moving very fluid. And then fast forward, we hit, '06, which was right where we kind of fell off the cliff. That was, I knew enough to be dangerous, but I didn't know enough to really figure out like, you really had to learn how to be a good agent when the world was falling apart. And it was my first dose of seeing how markets can just completely change in the midst of 6 months, 12 months, and how you just have to be super adaptable. Because what you knew 2 years ago in a market 2 years ago is different, and you look at today and all the things that we're facing, right? I remember it was 2007. I was pregnant with my first daughter and I had a listing in the city and I think I had to sell it 7 times. So it fell out of contract 6 times because it was like the market was in a free fall and it was when things were going to short sale and foreclosure. So it was sort of wild to ride that experience. And then kind of coming out the other side, I moved into managing for Et Properties. As we started growing, we decided in 2009, our 2 owners, Mike and Thad, decided, the market was struggling, but it was a great time to grow. They had the foresight to recognize that when others are kind of really struggling to hang on, if you have the ability and momentum to actually push in a hard market, that's where real growth happens. So we actually started expanding in the suburbs in 2009 when yeah, everyone else was kind of in a free fall, but we were this really attractive brokerage that kind of said, look, the market is what it is, and we're going for it. And we're going to figure out how to be scrappy. We're going to help you figure out how to sell and survive. And so I moved out of sales and started managing in 2010 with At Properties, helped Mike and Thad grow At Properties in the suburban marketplace, opened 4 offices. And one of the things that I loved to do throughout all of that time is help agents figure out how to be strategic, how to help develop sort of their brand. I loved coaching agents. I really liked rolling up my sleeves, sitting next to them and kind of helping them get out of their own headspace, which is a very scary place to be for a lot of us agents, and say, like, let's figure out your success track. And so started just organically doing a lot of like coaching and training. I started doing kind of business model, business planning sessions. And so a lot of the stuff that I did kind of evolved into my role. I was EVP of Agent Development and Culture, and really worked with my colleague to look at how do we train and coach, our collective group of agents, and did a lot of cool stuff there. And then recently, about 2 years ago, moved into my role now as Chief Brokerage Officer. So really responsible for retaining our agents, helping them grow, coming up with, again, strategic ways to help them figure out how to move their business forward. And then I'm also looking at growth and recruiting new talent, finding, individuals that kind of see our philosophy, our culture, how we do things, and see if they would be somebody great to, align with us and be able to move their business forward. So
I
that's
love that. What an amazing,
nutshell.
yeah, that's an amazing journey. And you got your hands full doing all of this.
Yeah. It's
And
fun.
what I love about you is like you're so hands-on. And you just mentioned, I like to be there by their side, working and learning. And I think that brings so much value. When we have guests on like you who can say, like, I'm living and breathing this alongside these agents. Like, you are working with them every day, going through growing pains, learning what they're experiencing, helping the anxiety. So you really have a front row seat to what's going on in these agents' lives every day and how we can kind of alleviate some of that,
Yeah.
which I think is really great.
Yeah. I mean, I talk with so many agents, and this is how I felt when I got out of sort of corporate America. I mean, it took me a while to find my legs. And I think this happens to a lot of people. Like, I was really used to somebody telling me when I needed to be somewhere, kind of the level of expectation they had of me, and when I got to sort of leave. Right. And so all of a sudden, you go to, get your license and become a real estate agent. And you can certainly learn how to calculate an acre, but you sure as heck don't really know how to be CEO of your own business. And I think that's the biggest thing. Is getting licensed is one thing, understanding kind of some of the technicality rules and requirements and regulations of what it is to be a real estate agent. But, I think what we've really recognized, and, for some of our newer agents, is we help agents really realize that they are a CEO and they are responsible for their success or failure. And, one of the things I've said to so many agents is like, I can't want it more for you than you want it for yourself. And a lot of them, I think, want it. There is just also almost this fear, though, of like, not even a failure, but it's like, what if I do get what I want? Can I handle it? Can I manage it? There's a lot, it can be a very lonely business. And so I think, as an agent, you've got to surround yourself with the right support, the right people, because sky's the limit. But sometimes I always say the most dangerous place to be is in here by yourself for an extended period of time, because you can almost talk yourself out of anything. You can enhance all of these doubts. And so it's kind of like getting out of your mind space and finding the support you need to help move you to the next level. And, that's what, we kind of, as a company, that's, part of sort of what we focus on.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that is such a great message to be sharing with your agents. And you're right. That's one thing about real estate, that I think is so cool. Like, we're all competitors, but also we're all working on deals together, and just that support that this industry has with each other when we are all coming together, learning, growing, saying like, hey, we're in this together. Like, I think that's really special, and having that connection and being able to lean on each other in when times are tough. That community makes just a ton of difference, I think. And it sounds like, you found that with your agents as well.
Yeah. And I think it's important. Like, I think sometimes people focus on scarcity in this business, like that yes, sure. Like, there is a pie of real estate that is going to be sold in any given year. But the reality is that there is enough business for you if you apply yourself. And back to your point, I always say we can be competitive and collaborative in the same breath. And the reality is we need to be. To your point, Allison, like we're doing deals with people all the time. And who do you do deals with? The agents that you like on the other side that are going to, be, representing their client in the best way possible, but are also deal makers, not deal breakers, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's, we also really encourage our agents to recognize, like, you know what, if you didn't get that business wasn't meant for you. Or did you bring everything that you could have to win that business? And odds are sometimes the answer is no. And, it's just getting real for agents to also not get hung up on what should have been mine. Again, there's plenty out there. If you work hard and you do the right things, you're going to see the opportunity, and I think you have to have kind of that positive mentality too. I'm a big believer of, people want to be engaging and doing business with somebody that brings positivity, intelligence, knows their craft, but, it makes them feel like, wow, we're going to be able to accomplish this. So, it starts kind of with our attitude as an agent.
It 100% does. Like that mindset is such a huge factor. And coming in with that positive energy is contagious. And like you said, people want to be around that. Like that is just going to make people want to work with you more. They're going to reach out when they're having that positive experience with you and they're going to feel positive. I know I feel a lot better when I talk to people that are happy and in a good mood versus those downers. You know what I mean? Is there anything that like you recommend, especially, knowing, if markets are a little challenging or not as busy as, they were in other times, how we can keep that mental strong? Is there any habits or practices that you kind of use or that you've taught your agents to use on how to keep that strong and positive outlook?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to, the article that I wrote for Inman a couple months ago, right? It was a topic I was, just talking to a group about, and we decided to kind of write about it because, we say like you sit there and you stress about all these things that you have no control over. You have
Right.
no control of where rates are going. You have absolutely no control over the inventory issues. Although I actually do believe as agents, we do have some control over that because if we communicate to our sphere of influence. There are so many people out there. I go to parties all the time where people are like, wait, really? There's like no like there's an inventory issue. You people are in their own world. And if they're not in the real estate game like we are every day, they don't even know what's going on. And, but I think there are certain aspects of this business that are completely out of our control. The economy right now, there's a lot going on there. There's just a lot of buzz. And so many of our agents I have found, are getting caught up in these headlines and they're stressing and it's causing them to not do the stuff that they should be doing, right? They kind of get so holed up and focused on all of these things and it is paralyzing them. And so, what I really believe in, and it kind of really goes back to my transition from corporate America to kind of suddenly running my own business, I had to create structure for myself. As an agent, you could come and you could go to the gym until noon, you could eat bonbons, you could watch, catch up on the summer I, turned pretty, and no one's going to tell you not to do it. And so I think that's where there has to be a certain level of discipline. And so, it starts with kind of creating structure. We're big followers of the ninja philosophy. We've had we have over 1,000 agents who've kind of gone through that installation. We do it every year. But one of the things that they've put together and we've kind of taken and we coach a lot of our agents on is something called the perfect week. And it really is about time blocking. It's like, what am I going to do on Monday? And it helps you outline. So it gives you an idea of what your week should look like. And, as agents, they can adjust, but it's everything from, getting your butt up at a reasonable time, right? And doing what you need to get yourself moving if that's important, whether it's working out. They talk a lot about focusing on gratitude, making sure you've got a really good idea of what your day is going to look like, kind of grounding yourself for the day, writing your 2 personal note cards or your 5, whatever it is that kind of gets you started. And then it helps you segment out what you should be doing Monday through Sunday. And I love that. And we've got like 2 variations. I have one that's sort of like for a brand new agent, because that sometimes is the biggest struggle. But as agents start growing and they want to scale, what I find that they're also doing is, they're spending 4 hours on an inspection when really they should be spending 30 minutes. Like there's a point at which you have to recognize, is my time best spent sitting at a 3-hour inspection? Or should I be paying somebody $50 or $100 to be sitting there? Maybe I come at the beginning and the end, but I'm using that other time to be more strategic. And so creating kind of a schedule for yourself, it allows you to kind of create boundaries and really start thinking about like, where should I be spending my time in a given day? Because otherwise you come into the office or you're at your home office, it's 9 o'clock. The next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock. And it's like, what did I do? So I think that time management is probably one of the biggest things that an agent could really focus on. It allows you to also control something. You are controlling your time, your week. And, half the battle is writing down that I'm going to write 2 personal note cards every morning from 9 to 10. If you can accomplish that, that's 10 people that you didn't reach out to prior. So kind of creating structure, we talk a lot about that, and kind of allowing you to run the business instead of the business sort of running you. So those are, kind of a couple of things, but, right now, and we're seeing right now too, that there are some agents really busy. And then there's a lot of agents that are kind of, slow. And some of it is, some maybe are newer and kind of came into the market when it was a little easier. And so now they're trying to figure out they need to fish more, right? They're not just getting these referrals or getting these opportunities as easily. And so they're having to understand kind of this idea that I've got to kind of go fish or build my pipeline. So it's learning that discipline is big.
It is. And it's such a great way to control that mindset. I feel like when you're in a routine, it's one less thing you have to think about. It takes away so much anxiety. We're talking about, ways that, you can control what you can control. And a routine is such a great place to do that. I'm such a big fan of routines. It sounds like you are too. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, on my perfect week, I want to sit down and write out my
Yeah.
week and what I'm going to do.
It's super helpful. And the thing is like, here's what I'm going to tell everybody out there. You are probably never going to get your perfect week perfect, but I will tell you, you are, so much more likely to at least do half of the things that you have in there, or it will at least allow you to sort of put a blocker on, spending too much time on the wrong thing. And, I feel like I need that. Like, I mean, you could probably tell I'm a talker. I love to, chat, connect with people. And especially as agents, like we like that. The art of connection is part of what we do so well, but it's like learning that can I accomplish what I need to in a 10 or 15-minute conversation versus having the conversation be 30 to 45 minutes. And I almost have to like set a timer for myself sometimes, to kind of learn that. But it is sort of like this discipline of, there's kind of like a law of diminishing returns at some point. Like you're spending too much time on one thing. And what are you missing by not spending the right amount of time on something to get what you need done? And then, sort of moving on to the next.
Yeah, that delegation I think is so important. And you touched on that, a minute ago when you said, like, hey, what is the stuff we can outsource? Like, what can we get off our plate? Like, what does not need, my immediate attention? Does that home inspection need me there for 3 hours? Like you mentioned, I think that is such a key part too. When we think about, ways to kind of alleviate some of that control, say, hey, I know this person's got it, so I can go to this appointment or I can go meet with this person or do whatever you need to do, even, within your personal life. I think that is so important too, and knowing how to delegate. And as a control freak, that's something I like that scares me so much. And I've had to learn to let go and train myself, kind of on that too. But once you start doing it, it's like, wow, why didn't I do this earlier?
Totally. And we also just say, like when you look at your schedule, you kind of always want to be focusing on like, what's a revenue generating activity, right? Like if I do this for 30 minutes, is there an odd that I'm getting a new client from it? Or is it going to get me closer to closing a particular deal, right? And, I think sometimes agents spend so much time on their existing business. They focus on the transactional piece because it's easy. It's comfortable. It's like, yes, I already got that listing, or yes, it's under contract and I'm going to do the best darn job making sure that inspection goes through and I follow up with that attorney. And we should be doing all of that. But again, it's like we got to knock that stuff out fast and be effective because we always need to be going back to what's next. How am I going to be building my business, moving forward? So and again, I think as agents, and I know I did this, it was easy to work on the stuff that I felt comfortable in. And it's always a little bit harder when you're going out and, proactively prospecting. But that's where, people really start seeing the difference.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's that CEO mindset, right? What's the next thing that I can do to make money? Where's my time best spent? You talked about CEO mentality and just how, agents kind of don't think about that when they enter this, but you really are the entrepreneur. You really are running your own business. And I think you're totally right. That's something that may not always be top of mind. So we talked about, you're talking about agents come in and they're feeling anxiety about this. And what do you think is making agents most anxious right now? And I know there's so much out there. You mentioned interest rates, inventory, all that good stuff. Is there like one thing that you're saying like this is freaking people out?
I would say kind of where we're at in particular is we still have a big inventory issue. We just don't have enough of it. And so I think that's the thing. A lot of people are stressed. I mean, I have agents who, talk about buyer fatigue. Have had clients write 8 and 9 offers, and it's just missing it because it's just so competitive. And, it's kind of like, how do you get these buyers to hang on, because it's almost like just when they're ready to give up. Like what we've talked a lot about recently is, especially as we're getting into the fall market, now's the time to tell your buyers to not give up, because so many people, for certain reasons, maybe because school's back in and now certain people can't make a move, or they've locked their kids into school for another year, or just people being priced out or fatigued, or saying like, and we can stay where we are for another year. We're going to start seeing a lot of that. And so it's like for those buyers who really do want to move, I think this fourth quarter is a nice opportunity if they can hang on and kind of get past the fatigue and kind of hang on there. I think there will be opportunity. But, for agents, it's super stressful navigating those conversations and also ensuring that these buyers don't feel like it's their agent's fault that they're not winning out, right? And so we just talk a lot about that, that has a lot to do with how you set expectations before you even get them in a car, before they need to know that how hard this market is or what their roadmap is going to look like. And you are kind of prepping them ahead of time so that by the time they're in that, maybe like fourth quarter fatigue, you can almost say, hey, remember when we talked about this? So I think that there's a lot of, agents that's a big stressor for them, really trying to find inventory for their clients. And then I just think that, transactions are down, right? Like the overall volume of the market we're seeing that it's up locally. But it's, transactions are not it's not because of transactions. It's just because pricing is continuing to go up, because we just are, still seeing not enough inventory, multiple offers. We're, seeing that, especially like in a lot of our suburban market and in areas of Chicago, single family homes, certain neighborhoods. It's, it's a lot. So I think it's, less inventory for still a large number of agents. So it is really competitive. So I think it's stressful, where you go on a listing presentation and it's like, wow, I really need to get this, right? In the past, sometimes, it felt a little bit more plentiful. So I think that that's a lot of the stress. I do think we're in a much better spot. I would say over the last year, this whole transition of communicating commissions and how to break out, being a listing agent versus a buyer's agent. I think there was a lot of issue at first with how am I going to get a buyer to sign anything? But I'm super proud to see, like, we just kind of did a 1 year later webinar, like, and, we were laughing. We're like, we're all still standing. And the reality is we're seeing some of our agents they actually love that they now have an opportunity to really have a buyer lock in with them. And, we're actually seeing that some of our agents feel like, wow, now I get to be in control of how much I'm getting paid for my services. And some of them have, been able to increase their commission levels. So, I think there are stresses in any market though, I mean, this is just part of being in the real estate game. It's a very personal business. You're dealing with high emotion, high stress. There's a lot of moving parts for the clientele. And so, as an agent, you got to just get used to knowing that this is part of what you signed up for. And I think the more experience you get better at it. But, it comes with its hard times for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's so fascinating about everything that we went through last year, right? Because certainly it felt like the ceiling was falling down on us, and everyone was like, "How are we going to navigate this?" But it has been really cool to see the way that our members here, very similar in Ohio to what you're experiencing with your agents. People have handled it really well. And it has, I think, overall been a really positive thing for the industry. And in the midst of all that chaos, that just goes to show that, like, hey, even though we're going through crazy times, I don't know when there's ever not going to be a crazy time in real estate, you know what I mean? But like, even when those moments come when we're like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. I don't know how I'm going to, be able to do this moving forward, that, a year later, 6 months later, that it's like, oh, we got through that. And it's actually like made us a lot better. I think
Yep.
that's like really cool to see. And you're right. I've been so proud about how our members have handled it too. It was a scary time there for a lot of us, but so much better. And that goes back to the point that you were saying in the beginning about great agents make it through tough times. And if it's a tough market, if it's, hard, that's when great agents are like, I'm thriving, I'm shining, like this is my time and I am taking over. And I think that is such a great, when we talked about mindset, I think that's such a great way to look at it, is it's not a scary thing or something that we should be worried or concerned about. It's a time to say like, hey, this is a huge opportunity and I'm going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. There's clients that need you. There's clients that are going to want to work with you. And the reality is, buying and selling real estate, yes, is there a small percentage of people who really think that they want to do it on their own? But most of the time, it's like if people really sit down and understand all that's involved, they just want somebody that's going to say, look, I've got this. I've done this a ton of times. I've worked with clients just like you. And I know how important this is to you. I know what this means to you. It's like they just want that, and they want that confidence. Confidence is one of the hardest things, I think. It takes a while to be able to get, but it's like, you see that moment. And I've seen that in agents that I've coached where they go from being so nervous and they go in for like their pitch and they come out and they're like, I got it. And I was like, of course you did. And then it's like they go again and it's like, they then come out and at some point they're sort of like, of course I got it. Right. And it's just like anything. We were all new at one point in time. I was reminiscing with an agent who I worked with at my very first brokerage. And I was laughing with him because I said, I was so terrified to have to call and make my first appointment. I was like, I wrote down what I was supposed to say. Hi, this is Amy Coor. I'm with J.A. Smith and Associates. I'd like to see 123 Main Street. Like, I was so worried about calling an agent. And I still remember that, it's like we were all new and we all had to feel dumb. We all had to cut our teeth on a lot of mistakes. And you're still going to make a mistake, even as a seasoned agent. I think that was one of the biggest things that was an aha to me when I first got into managing. So, I'd been selling for about 7-8 years. And I moved over, but I was a brand new managing broker. And, and I knew, look, there were a lot of agents who'd been selling for years longer than me and knew, quite honestly, a lot more than I did. But I also knew some of my strengths, right? But what I was always so surprised at is I would have these agents, again, top producers, who would call me kind of in a panic. And they would say, I just want to run this by you. I just want to make sure I'm handling this well. And they always had the right answer. They always knew what to do. But it just goes to show, sometimes you get caught up in your own head, and every one of us always needs kind of that buddy or that group or that mentor or somebody to just be like, I'm thinking about this the right way, right? No matter how good you are, you're always going to second guess yourself. And actually, I think some of the best agents do second guess themselves sometimes. And that's a good thing, right? Because they're wanting to make sure that they're going to get it right. And so it kind of opened my eyes to realize no matter how many deals you've done, no matter how long you've done this, there's always new situations. The market's always shifting. And it's okay to not always have every answer or have everything. I think it's, actually knowing and owning that and making sure you get it right, is way more critical. And so it just sort of opened my eyes. It kind of put everybody back at like a more leveling state for me, and in realizing, we're all kind of just navigating this, and no one's got everything perfect. And I've shared that with a lot of newer agents, and it almost made them feel better to realize, like, like you're going to learn something maybe faster than somebody who's been doing this for 20 years. It's just your experience will build, but there's always going to be new things happening.
Always, yeah. And you're right, leaning on each other, having that accountability partner, that person you can go to check, I think is makes all the difference in the world. And yeah, we're all human beings. We are going to make mistakes. No one is perfect that has been in this industry. We are all learning and growing. And I think that's a great thing about this industry is it does force you to be always learning and always growing. And especially if you want to reach the levels that we just spoke about today. But Amy, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Yeah.
This was fantastic. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour.
I know, right?
But no, you were fantastic and you shared some really great things with us today. And I know our listeners are going to take stuff and start implementing it right away. So I really appreciate your time and coming on and sharing this with us today.
Yeah, you bet. Well, Allison, thank you. I appreciate it so much. And if you need anything, I'll send you the perfect week schedule if you have people that are asking for it. But it's just one of the things that I think is a great tool for agents to kind of start taking their control back, right?
Absolutely. No, I would love that. Can't wait. I will share that, with all of our listeners, all included in the show notes. And I appreciate it again. And to all of our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week. Talk then.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.